Okay, thank you very much for all those who are here, as this is the last last presentation of the conference, and I know those can be tough to attend, especially after such intensive days as we have at ZIFCon. So on behalf of organizer, I guess, thanks a lot again. So to cut to the point and not to have this drag over for an hour and a half or something like this, let's get started on what we'll be talking about and who I am and why am I talking about. I'm a great supporter of the Inigo Montoya style of introduction, so just greeting, we are there. Something about myself, then establishing a link. The presentation we've heard were mostly on the red team side, hence I'm quite happy about that because I would like to present the blue side of things that may be useful, I hope, also for the purposes of the adversary emulation. And in terms of managing expectations, I hope to alleviate threat intel analysts in terms of how they approach and how they address the threats when something big happens in the world, because sometimes I feel that they might get overburdened with what are the expectations from management and how the support to the rest of organization can look like. So we will discuss some actual case studies. I mean, it's of course impossible to prove the negative, like the attack did not happen despite some political tension or geopolitical relations. Hence, we will discuss attacks that can be clearly traced to those high-profile events. But also, we will take a look at how sometimes the analysts can clearly overreach with their predictions and assessment, and we will take a look at the strategic document of policy, the Chinese 5-year plan, and how the analysts who are dealing with the Chinese-based threat actors approach it. There will be also a short comment on how the Russian invasion of Ukraine changed the threat landscape, but I will comment on that later. And finally, we will deal with conclusions and how to address properly those situations. So first of all, who am I? I'm working as a principal threat intelligence analyst at Quo Intelligence. So we deliver tailored intelligence services and solutions to our customers. As a principal analyst, I'm working directly with customers, gathering their intelligence requirements, making sure that our products meet their expectations, and also doing the research activities. I like to share my knowledge, hence sometimes I'm a teaching assistant for some cyber threat intelligence course. If you take the live online version, usually in the US time zone, I might be there. And you can read my thoughts and my side work on the OSINT, national security and threat intelligence music at my blog counterintelligence.pl. In my free time, I like flying stuff. I like aviation. I've got my own ADS-B station. So if you use flight radar and look at what's going on in Poland, you might get flights that are captured by my station. I like flipping balisongs and also climbing, mostly bouldering, but that's also on B, so I had to go with climbing. And of course, feel free to connect if you will have any questions after the presentation. Just reach me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or email. It's easy to find. So when I saw that my presentation is last on the second day, I was like the expectations are low. It's just so that I'm the only thing stopping you from going home. So it might be mehish. But actually, I think Dorota made quite great decision, because the scenario I wanted to present or to introduce the narrative is exactly that it's afternoon at Friday. Like Friday 4-5 p.m. and it's Friday 4 or 5 p.m. So in normal circumstances you would be preparing to head home, and it's common cliche in the development circles that you should not push things into production at Friday 4 p.m. because something will blow up, and it's of course not the case usually with security teams. I mean, if you have access to EDR and you might push some blocking rule that will crush the infrastructure, but otherwise that's not usually the case in our sector. But what is the case is that either the incident happens at the least convenient moment, or that the worst event, the media picks up something and blows it so that it gains visibility for the to the C-level personnel, and they usually, as we will talk about, move to the intelligence team for support. And the best example of this type of, let's say, bit of spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt is this cyber Pearl Harbor scenario, the huge destructive attack that will happen and that will cause massive damage to infrastructure. And it's something that C-level might be worried of, and not without a reason, because it comes up again and again. The top example here is actually from Poland. It says, Polish general, we expected a bit of something like cyber Pearl Harbor, and he's talking about situation in Ukraine. Lower you've got Leon Panetta, ex-director of CIA, who was also talking about this, and of course a bunch of journalists who were on it. So when things like this happen, when there is political tensions around the globe, when there is even that's picked up by media, what does the management or the head of security organization does? It can reach to the intelligence team and can ask them to provide analysis, find out what's going on, assess how it will affect our organizations. And what can happen is that we end up in the danger zone. Why? Because while it's normal that intelligence team is in an advisory role, what threat intelligence can be quite moody, let's say, quite mixed. Like, you might be familiar with the company Janes. They are most known for their military reference Janes fighting ships, but they also have threat intelligence service. But their threat intelligence is around insurgency activity, military posture of countries, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and so on. So if you're a bored intelligence analyst and just applying to various LinkedIn jobs, and you would apply to threat intelligence and Janes, and you're a cyber threat intelligence analyst, they might be quite surprised at the job interview. So on the other hand, we've got like our own, let's say, cyber threat intelligence, as here represented by the SANS course 4578, cyber threat intelligence, that teaches you how to analyze the tradecraft of the adversary. So is the one threat intelligence more correct than another? Of course not. But the issue comes when there is a mix of expectation from those who enacted and support the threat intelligence service. So it might be quite expected that the expectation will be that not only the intelligence team will have expertise in technical analysis of threats and in following the infrastructure, following the malware implants, but also when some let's say adversarial actions happens, they will analyze the geopolitical landscape, provide the sound analysis of what will happen, whether we will be cyber attacked, and so on and so on. So, for example, at my company, at Qual Intelligence, we have folks from both the cyber side and the geopolitical side, and we work together, but we are a specialized outlet. And also, and of course, this might not happen if you are in the organization. You might be the only threat intelligence analyst. You might be a threat intelligence that's working with the incident response team, for example, as support. So how to approach it? What to do? So first of all, we need to establish some assumptions and like deal with the reality. Regardless if you are a small company or if you are a big company like Amazon or Microsoft, your field of view will be limited, and especially in terms of the analysis that extends beyond the cyber landscape. So this, combined with the fact that you will kind of instinctively think that or certainly the management can think that the early world event affects you, can lead to biases on your side. So you will start to create the intelligence requirements and intelligence collections plan and so on based around the fact that you're like at the center of these activities, even if they do not happen. So you might be familiar with the Kevin Bacon meme, which is the relationship between Kevin Bacon and other actors, counted by how many there are links of separation in terms of movies. So, for example, Michael Emerson's Kevin Bacon number is 2 because he acted in movies with these folks from movie Loverboy, and they acted with Kevin Bacon. And in the same example, of course, you can draw an arbitrary relationship between your organization and basically any event in the world. And this is something that we should strive to avoid. Because what can happen and what can exacerbate this problem is that when high-profile event happens, like conflict starts, like there is a tension between the country where your company is located in and so some other country that is active in terms of cyberspace operation, you may want to move your collection, so what you're focusing on as an intelligence team, to things focused on this event. And in the first look, it looks perfectly reasonable, because you want to find something about this event, you want to analyze the activity, you want to compare it with your infrastructure and so on. But ultimately, this may lead to like having a tunnel vision on what is happening. So of course, if you for example take the invasion of Ukraine as an example, and you will start looking for malware related to that, you will read the reports from Microsoft and from other companies, from Ukrainian side on what's going on, you will find something. And by extending this threat relationship further and further, you might find a link that's not necessarily direct or really feasible to your threat landscape. So first question to ask is, do you have any direct visibility? So when we are talking about the analysis of those far-reaching events, do we not just base on the visibility provided by others, and what are the biases related from it? And if we talk about the highly volatile situation, do we have this direct relationship, which we'll be talking about in our examples, or do we just have the impression of the relationship? So let's go with the first case study that shows a kind of perfect storm of events that lead to retaliatory attack. So there was a certain gentleman in the United States, I think he passed away, so he was not available for comment, but he thought that the best way to deter Iran from pursuing their nuclear program was to detonate a nuclear warhead in the desert in Iran and threaten the further nuclear strike if the program will not subsidize. So this, after this, his casino enterprise suffered a wiper attack. It was some Visual Basic wiper, nothing like super special, but it did its job, and cost of recovery was as we see $40 million. And we have attribution from the US intelligence, so we have confirmation that Iran-linked groups were responsible. And what happened behind the scenes? So the quote was from Sheldon Adelson, who was the CEO of Las Vegas Sands Corp. This push toward retaliation and this adversarial relationship happened just at the top level. So like straight, the first officer, the first representative of the company made this kind of implication of threat. And of course, from the perspective of the Iranian groups, that was treated as an invitation to this kind of US policy. And why I'm saying this was kind of a perfect storm, because in case of the Iran structure of cyber operation, there are many subtleties and complexities. So for example, Iran bases heavily on the independent contractor groups that are essentially competing for the government contracts, if we can call it like that. The groups that have effects, that can provide effects, are getting paid and are getting further contracts. The competition makes the operations more aggressive and so on. And Iran has a history of using the retaliatory attacks. So for example, in 2012, we had a so-called Operation Ababil, which was DDoS against multiple US banks like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America. And this was caused by this was a response, as communicated by the groups responsible, to the inflammatory movie published by the radical fundamentalist Christian preacher from the United States. We also had deployment of Shamoon against the Saudi Aramco. which was highly destructive and was communicated as a retaliation to the acts of Saudi Arabia in the region. And if we look at the work of those groups and then compare and contrast it with the let's say more pure espionage operation like those various kittens or APT 33, 34, 45 that are working, we will see that clearly Iran goes two ways in those terms, and the destructive attacks can be highly likely given these retaliatory relationships. So this is actually what happened in the Saudi Aramco case. The Saudi Aramco tried to deny that it had much effect, but the journalist leaked this photo that after the attack, this flotilla of tankers of trucks could not get the oil from the refinery due to the damage to the systems. And another case study was the Guardians of Peace attack against Sony Pictures Entertainment. And what happened there was this was a response to the movie, the interview. If you haven't seen it, then apologies, but there will be spoilers on how it ends. Then you can leave or watch the presentation later online. But the movie was about two guys, TV reporters, who were acting on behalf of CIA. And went to North Korea to assassinate Kim Jong-un. And it caused quite a stir, and it caused a diplomatic tension and threats from the North Korea, not only against Sony directly, but also against the theaters, so that there will be terrorist acts ahead, and resulted in attack that was not only just a hack, and they leaked a lot of stuff from Sony Pictures Entertainment, but also disrupted the IT infrastructure used, the employees who would turn on their PCs in the morning. So this red skeleton that they've been hacked by the Guardians of Peace group, and there was threat to take down the interview before the certain timeline or else, and so on. So let's take a look on how it relates to what could have happened in the background. So when we look at the North Korea state priorities, this is complied from the public US intelligence reporting and think tank reporting, is that major priorities are development of nuclear capabilities, ensuring the role of Kim family, and having this dominant position in Korean Peninsula. And especially if you look at the second point, the ensuring the rule of Kim family, like how this can be threatened and what could happen. So what happened in the movie, and now there is a spoiler ahead, is that at the end of the movie, Kim Jong-un is traveling in a helicopter, and it gets shot down by a tank nonetheless, and he dies in a fireball. So why this is so significant? Because, I mean, this is not the perfect picture, because this is actually the CIA protecting the then Afghanistan President Hamid Karzai, but I could not find a picture of CIA killing a foreign leader. But the point is that being involved in foreign policy matters, meddling in politics of other states, is exactly what CIA does. So from the perspective of North Korea, what happened is that the movie was the depiction of what could have happened, of what will happen, like the declaration of threat from the United States. Now, it is debatable what happened in terms of the tasking, so whether it were overzealous elements of the North Korean intelligence and cyber groups, or was this order from the top. But this relationship of kicking the hornet's nest in terms of digging right into what makes North Korea the state it is, so the rule of the Kim family, was what caused this attack and against the private company, threats of violence, response from the President of the United States, who said that Sony made a mistake because they should not have taken down the picture, because it's essentially foreign states censoring US artists and so on, and all this mess. So next, let's move on to WADA, so World Anti-Doping Agency, and events that surrounded the 2018 Winter Olympic Games. So as we know now, Russia is quite proficient in providing illegal support to their athletes. They were running a doping program that's run by the FSB and SVR, and the officers were involved in faking the urine tests, opening the containers, and so on. So there were two distinct operations that happened as let's say, relation to that, in response to that. First was leaking of documentations from WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency, and it was openly advertised by the group as the Fancy Beer hack team. So Fancy Beer was the moniker used by the CrowdStrike to describe the activities of Russian GRU, or well, one of the teams, and they said, yeah, this is us. It was also almost like in the face. But what happened then during Olympics was there was another attack, and here, as we were talking about the direct relationship and direct victims, here it's not so easy. So the attack was against the Olympic infrastructure that was involved in Wi-Fi access for journalists, in ticket distribution. So if you wanted to buy a ticket during Olympics, like last minute, you could not do it. And the collateral victim was not the, well, collateral direct victim was the Olympic Games, but the collateral victim was IT provider, as here we can see in the indictment issued by the United States Department of Justice, the IT company one, whose infrastructure has been breached, and because they were IT providers to the Olympic Games, it was essentially a supply chain attacks. They were used to disrupt the Olympics. They had the infrastructure, and of course it does not matter if it would be IT company 1 or IT company 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or any other. The company that was here responsible for the Olympic Games got tackled because of the relationship. And if we compare those two, we can see quite a shift in the tactics, procedures, because while the Fancy Beer hacking team and their leaks were openly advertised like this is us, in case of the attack against direct attack against Olympic Games, the malware attribution was heavily thwarted, or there were attempts to thwart the attribution, using false flags, trying to make malware look like the work of the Lazarus team, and so on. Also, the Russian government officially denied responsibility. Here, as we are reading the indictment by the Department of Justice, those actions were actually attributed to the actors of Russian state. So, as we see, when there was a hack and leak operation, it was quite open. But once we moved to this destructive operation that could be considered in various different terms, for just a cyber sabotage to perhaps an armed attack, depending on how you look at it. The level of admittance, let's say, dropped significantly, but the effect of those did not. So those were the case studies that showed how attacks can happen as a result of geopolitical tension. But what if analysts are a bit overzealous in terms of analysis, and sometimes there are many roadblocks for the analysis? So China's policy is, well, not based, but there is a major document of China policy, the 5-year plan, which shapes the economic and national priorities for the next 5 years. And especially interesting for analysts and prominent seems the 13th plan, 13 5-year plan, so which was supposed to cover the period between 2016 and 2020. And it included, for example, the Made in China policy, so the move to manufacturing of components in China and getting the intellectual property on site, innovation, strengthening the industrial base, and so on. And if we take a look at the reporting from the period, we can see that everything is 5 years plan. Like we have at the top the report from Mendiant, lower is the report about the action. This is the report that's known in the cyber threat intelligence community, the report Operation SMN. So it was combined effort of Microsoft, Cisco, FireEye, then multiple companies that made the effort to describe this axiom threat actor. And here is on the right side is the document from the United States government, Department of Health and Human Services, which also describes China threats. And you can see here all over the references to the 5-year plans in terms of the threat actor relationships. So I took a look at what actually it's in this 5-year plan. Actually, that's a lie, because I knew what was there, because I was dealing with the China related threat actors. But for the narrative sake, let's say we take a look now. And if we those are public documents, no need for some advanced collection. So if we take a look, we can see that the technologies named in China are aerospace equipment, so maybe something related to jet fighters, to flight transport, marine engineering, so naval, shipbuilding, rail transit, manufacturing tools, CNC, so computer numerical control, machine tooling used in production and precise manufacturing, robotics, so common now in production lines, agriculture, medical equipment, chemical machinery, next generation information and technology, biotech industry, and that's nice for them, but that's not the end. The spatial information processing and so on, advanced materials and new energy vehicles. So quite an extensive list. And if we look at the other threat actors that were supposedly active before these 5-year plans, like here described by by CrowdStrike, the Putter Panda activity, they targeted aerospace industry, APT1, both of these groups related to People's Liberation Army activity that targeted IT, transportation, agriculture. Or if we look at the Vinity in its various groups that targeted chemical companies, high-tech companies, machine equipment companies, we may ask, like, what's going on? Did those groups miss the memo that there will be a next 2016 plan that they should refer to in terms of their targeting? We can also like scroll back, and if you now take a look at the Department of Human and Health Services presentation, you can see that they also actually describe the activity that took place between 2006 and 2014, and is also somehow related to this 2016 5-year plan. So what happened in the end, from my perspective, is that because this plan was so extensive and covered so many different industries, there was no relation. It had no significant diagnostic value. What happened is that because of those threat actors' activities were geared and pointed towards towards supporting China's national priorities or any country's priorities like defense, strengthening industrial base, and so on, the use of 5-year plan in reporting was not all about correct, let's say methodologically, was not always about the using additional factor for analysis, but rather a case of confirmation bias, where the analysts saw the 5-year plans, like pick and choose if it fits to the activity, and then it was used as a supporting argument, as something like supporting their thesis. And if we look actually at the 14th 5-year plan, we can see that those priorities that we saw earlier, especially strengthening technological advantage, developing national security, boosting domestic housing demand, so manufacturing and having materials to create them, are still present. So we cannot take out of context like one single piece of document, and there are multiple for the China. And take it, just try to apply it, but instead we have to, fortunately or unfortunately, take a look at bigger picture and make sure that when we are taking in evidence, they are not here to support our cause, but actually to check on us if the causes are in fact correct. So now comes the moment that the presentation was supposed to look a bit different, because when I was submitting the call for papers in March, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was still, let's say, quite in its early phase. So I kind of thought that by the time the this IFCON will happen, we will be in a bit different place, but it's still a stalemate. So I would like not to comment on its consequences yet, but we can see on what happened already and what did not happen. So definitely what did not happen and was to kind of, let's say in air quotes, a bit of disappointment of many cyber threat analysts is that there was no expected massive cyber Armageddon, let's say massive destructive attacks, and for various reasons. So we had these various hacktivities groups like Killnet or Legion attacking DDoSing targets in Europe and in Ukraine. We had the DDoS attacks against the Latvia and Lithuania after the announcement of sanctions against rail transport in Kaliningrad. And we had the activity so during very early phase, like days that followed the invasion and days before. We had attack against the satellite communication provider, which crippled like internet access. We had the DDoS attacks against banks and government sites, which, you know, when country is getting invaded, it's natural that citizens look for them to secure their belongings. And Microsoft described the activity in the report, and they mentioned that wipers were being deployed and so on. But because of the preparation of Ukrainian computer emergency teams and other factors, they were not as successful. But what did not happen, and what many companies, and this was the inspiration for this presentation, is that many companies were kind of, they were upset, to say least. I mean, because they thought like this was a major geopolitical event, so this will like fall back on us. But of course, here we are going back to this dilemma of the Kevin Bacon effect and main character syndrome. So it's natural for such situation to make you overestimate your threat landscape. But it is the job of the analysts to make sure that this overestimations does not happen. So here we can break down the cases of what was breaking down our case studies into what were the motivations, method, and relationship. So basically, if we look at the methods of attack in case of this where we saw this relationship, there were either destructive or hack and leak activities. So the response to the geopolitical event in each case was proportional in a way that it was not a covert operation, it was not concealed, it was supposed to have this effect that will kind of bounce back on the target. And of course, as we mentioned, the relationship is not always directly adversarial. So in case of Las Vegas casinos, and in case of the Sony Pictures, we had this like seemingly direct threat, but in fact, in case of Las Vegas casinos and Olympic Games, we had this seemingly direct relationship. But what happened was, in other cases, is that some companies were just collaterals. So Sony Pictures, of course, have no intention of starting a war in North Korea or deploying CIA operatives to kill the leader. They just were doing hard. The IT services provider attack during Winter Olympics was not involved in the assessment of Russian doping scandal and so on. But because they could establish this second-tier relationship, they were attacked. So how to deal with those and how to remain sane? So I think the worst thing that can happen when these things happen is trying to establish threat intelligence program like right now. So if you are in a situation of heightened tensions and you will want to have new service and so on, it will be always biased toward collection of the information around these threats. So having the preparations and making sure that you've got intelligence requirements, you know this relationship with the vendors and supply chains and threats, can make sure that you will not actually be will not be actually alert fatigue, as security operation folks might say, and we'll have clear-headed analysis. So in terms of the intelligence requirements and expectations of management, we have these, we have to manage, we have to know if we have even capability to assess the geopolitical situation of, if we are more on the, if we are more on the cyber threat side, so we can only provide information of that. We have to fight against like putting additional priorities if we are making sure that that what we do is sound methodologically and provides adequate information. And I like models and I like methodologies that because they provide a repeatable sequence of steps for different situations. And one of those known in the cyber threat intelligence is the diamond model. So it's, I mean, it's here it's arrows model, but you can imagine the diamond that connects the vertices. And it has two main axes, and it maps the relationship between adversary and victim, so like socio-political axis, and the infrastructure and capability, so technical axis. And this diamond model made by Sergio Caltagirone and others, highly recommend reading about it. It's got its axioms, and one, there is always relationship between the adversary and victim that causes the action to happen. But my axiom is that if you try hard enough, you will find a relationship between anything. So it's important to, when assessing this social political axis, to ask what exactly relationship you have in mind. Is it direct, or is it direct after many steps? Is there goals that will be achieved if you will be targeted by the adversary, and in case of destructive attack there will be some goals to be achieved. And of course, as if we step back, the assessment of those goals does require the expertise to have a political situation. From my perspective, it's often better for the threat intelligence team to kind of push back on the expectation to provide those. Like recently in my company, in my team, we had a short discussion on what is easier: is cyber threat intelligence easier, or is this geopolitical? And one might think that, in terms of geopolitical, you can collect information, this open source, you have these think tanks reports, this open source intelligence reporting from various government agencies, and in terms of technical intelligence, you need to have some malware reverse engineering knowledge, DFIR knowledge, and so on. So it might be considered more difficult, but I do not think that's the case. And that's because the adequate collection of information that will not be biased, will not be just public reporting, but instead will feed you like on the ground view on what's going on, is at least equally challenging. You need to know the culture, you need to know the language in most cases, you need to know which sources are biased, and so on. So this all contributes into sometimes like easy ways of relying on Associated Press, Reuters cables, which might be great, but will always be biased towards how we perceive the situation. So how to counteract that? I would say that technical threat intelligence team might want to focus on the technical threat intelligence. So we do not necessarily have to have a knowledge of what is going on in terms of the geopolitical events, but we can be prepared towards certain deployment of certain tactics and procedures that we observe from our analysis on the threat landscape that are used to achieve those goals. So as we've seen here, the wipers and denial of service attacks are very common in case of those operations, but we've only like scratched the surface. Of course, if you have threat intelligence team, you should pull more data and see exactly how these DOS attacks were provided. If such thing would happen, how it would translate into your monitoring and response. So do you have procedures for that? And in this case, you can kind of mitigate the need to have very in-depth geopolitical reporting, which might not be available to you, and instead try to raise the bar for your organization in terms of the specific attack. So, and finally, assessing those TTPs and so on would give you ideally a line of defense on how to prevent those intrusions. Okay, so I guess that's kind of what I wanted to conclude with, essentially with these points on how to counteract the biases and so on. So thank you for coming to ZIFCon. Thank you very much for your time.